Are you listening?
This is the Rob Scott Show.
Damn.
I mean, really, like, if we're not trying to change the world, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Welcome to the Rob Scott Show. Hey, Sarah, how you doing?
I'm great, Rob. Welcome back. It's great to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you. So I know what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about this framework that I think is really helpful if we can notice it. And I think it can be a real detriment to us if we don't notice it. And it's really a framework of thinking about how we spend our time. And what the difference is consuming versus creating. Okay?
Oh, I like that. I like that.
So if it's the amazing thing in our world is that it's become easy to consume better and better stuff all the time. The potential problem is we end up consuming so much, which really hits our sort of instant gratification muscle. It feels really good in the moment, but over time, it doesn't really it doesn't really feel satisfying, right? We end up kind of watching other people. We end up consuming tons of food, consuming tons of education. And the opposite of that is being a creator, being somebody who's actually one of the people out there who's being followed, who's being listened to, who's leading. And, this is almost like leading versus following in a sense as well. And so in this, episode of the show, I want to help people switch into the identity of creator instead of just consumer. And obviously we're not going to stop consuming, but I want to get a handle on our consumption in different ways. And I think that'll be really valuable to people.
Yeah. And I like, how on the podcast we get to kind of talk about both sides of things and kind of how to manage in the middle. So that feels very useful. And I can already feel into the difference of what it feels like to consume something versus what it feels like to create something. So
yeah. So, I mean, let's talk about how easy it is to be consuming now, which this is kind of new in our world. We haven't had as much access to, what technology offers us, the ease of getting at food and all that. So like, just think about information, right? There's the whole internet. Anytime, all of it. There's books, magazines, billboards, honestly, advertisements everywhere, right? Everything you're consuming on social media, on the radio, on buildings, on cars, it's all information that if we're taking it in, we're consuming that, right? And then there's consumption of entertainment. I don't think we've ever had, clearly we've never had as much access to entertainment. There's movies and TV and Netflix and Hulu. Literally the list of internet providers of entertainment, Sling TV, Prime Video, Google Play, Instagram TV, Facebook Live, YouTube videos, what people might be listening to now, a podcast or something on YouTube, right? And then consumers of food, right? Fast food, sweet food, farm to table food, all that, it wasn't long ago where we had to go hunt to get our food. Now it's like food is just right kind of there. And so
between which grocery store you shop at.
Totally, yeah. Like, right, we can get into that. Like,
so many.
Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, Aldi, Kroger, Acme, on and on and on, right? So it's the consumption of stuff is really satisfying kind of in the moment, right? It's awesome to go watch a comedy special. It's awesome to go see a movie. It's awesome to do this stuff. But the picture that I want to paint is the person who is finding that they're kind of defaulting to just watching TV or scrolling through the internet, and they're eating bonbons, and they're not necessarily happy about it, but it gets them through the moment. They're like defaulting to consumption instead of what really feels better, which is creating, right? You writing a poem or making a video or putting something out, being a leader, being a speaker, all those options, being an author, being somebody who matters. And before we go down the road to that, I do want to honor the growth, right? This is the reason that we create technology and automation is that we want to make the hard things easier, right? We want to build robots that can go dig the ditches, because digging ditches is dangerous. It's difficult. It's not fun. It's hard. And so very few of us would argue that how we live now doesn't have massive advantages to it, compared to very difficult times in the past. Our technology totally creates connection. It does all this stuff, and we automate these boring tasks. We outsource horrible, repetitive things or physically dangerous things to technology and automation, all that. And so on a whole lot of levels, that's a really, really good thing. But we end up kind of losing the significance of our own contribution to consciousness, or our own contribution to mankind, or our own contribution to our neighborhood or our family, or basically.
Or even ourselves.
Yeah.
Exactly. Honoring the gifts that we have naturally as ourselves.
Totally. And doing the things that matter to us, right? When we come up with, wow, I've got this thing I want to do, we end up kind of letting this muscle in our brain atrophy of that doing. And it just becomes easier and easier to go, well, maybe I'll do that later. And right now I just want to kind of veg out or whatever. And it actually exhausts us. And it's this vicious cycle of that exhaustion leads to, it's easier just to default to not do again. And so, not doing what? Well, maybe not working out, maybe not being the entrepreneur that you want to be, maybe not showing up at work in the way you want to, maybe not doing creative and wonderful things for the people that you love in your life, right? I like to think of this. I go, imagine only consuming, right? If you just can think of that, for somebody in pain, that might feel like that's the dream, right? You would be king or queen. You would just sit back and people would feed you grapes and you could just take all the time. But if we actually look at that, it kind of conjures a different image, right? It's
right.
Just laying on the couch, kind of being entertained, eating bonbons. I've had a sensation lately where I'm going through Netflix and there's so much there. It's actually like a challenge to pick what to watch. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I often spend more time picking what I'm going to watch than watching whatever.
And then you start something and you're like, man, this isn't as good as that other thing I could be watching. So you dip out 15 minutes in and it's almost like we've lost. So we end up on these like Instagram videos or shorter YouTube things because our attention span is completely atrophying. And so it becomes this itch. It's like this desire for more, right? And so what does that image conjure? It's like somebody just eating bonbons, not moving, probably feeling unhealthy, probably overspending, procrastinating, having these feelings of entitlement, right, that start to happen unconsciously. The me culture, right? And ultimately that sort of fear of missing out. And
I'm sorry if this is a little bit of a side tangent. I don't want to take it down, but when I hear consuming, there is the attention and the technology and all the food and all these ways, but I actually think of literal stuff. And I was thinking about what you said about how there's different access to technology, and that's great because that's growth and that's change and that's innovation. But if you even think about your experience or people's experience today, that they can have grocery shopping. You don't have to leave your house. You can go online. You might not even have to type in a credit card or pull anything out of your wallet. Maybe your fingerprint is what allows you to spend the money. It's such and I'm not saying that's bad or good. I'm just saying it's such an interesting study on where we're at in our world, where these tools have made these things that are time consuming really easy and efficient. But they've also, there's something about literally pulling money out of your wallet and watching it leave. And then we got to the credit cards that we're swiping. And now it's like, here, let me just give you my fingerprint. And I've all of a sudden made a purchase.
Yeah, or scan my phone, right?
Yeah, like what's lost there and what's gained there. And it's super interesting. So
it's totally amazing. And so it's not that we're saying any of these advancements are bad. They're all phenomenal in different ways. However, I want everybody to check in. How do you feel when all you do is consume, right? And let's honor that it can feel pretty good in the moment. I do a ton of it. We all do a ton of it, right? It's a dynamic that's kind of happening all the time. We have to consume food. It's wonderful to consume information, all that. But what happens longer term if we're letting the muscle of creation or contribution atrophy, right? We end up potentially feeling lazy, worthless, tired, fat, whatever, right? And so think about who do we follow and who do we ultimately envy, not in a bad way. And there's probably a separate conversation about how we're not really always representing ourselves honestly online, right? We definitely, all those people that you're following on Instagram may not be as wealthy as you think they are. They may not be as happy as you think they are, et cetera. But let's just take that out of this conversation for a second and just imagine that the people that are creating value out there, real entertainment, real education, all that, there's many of my clients end up kind of envying them and they want to do that too, right? They want to participate. And so who are those people? Well, it's the authors, right? I know people that have written like 5 books and in a wonderful way, I really envy their contribution, right? One of my clients is a multiple time important author in the world. And the fact that he's done that it's a huge accomplishment, right? If somebody's got a big podcast and they're popular and they're doing all this stuff, it's really like, hey, good job, right? Because they are one of the creators. They're the innovators. They're the people that are making the art and the entertainment and the education. And so if I end up asking any of my clients what they really want, it's not generally to sit on the couch and just consume. Right? It's not, that may be the selfish drive. Like that may be an honest, like real wish in one moment. But if you really check in with people, they want to be the creators. They want to build a business that creates huge value. They want to be an author. They want to stop procrastinating and be the person that people are listening to, the person that can do something when they say they will, right? They can be their word. And they honestly want to give to others, right? And so,
I think they want fulfillment, really. Yeah. I mean, even people who do achieve and they are sitting on the couch, they're still thinking, okay, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. I mean, just like you said with your Netflix, you know, you finally pick something and you're like, this isn't what I thought it could be when I looked at all the things, right? So really it's that kind of inner desire for fulfillment and kind of a loss of what will do that. Or realistically, what will do that?
Yeah. And I mean, step one is for sure to just begin to think about your own life in a sense of how much am I consuming and how much am I creating? And it's not like one has to win out, right? You may consume a ton more than you create. That's fine. But are you creating anything that matters to you? And, you know, this is a very loose term. Like if you show up and do a great job at your job, it may not be obvious what you're creating with that, but that act of contribution, right? That act of showing up, being your word, doing good work is where our sense of self-love and self-worth comes from. It is where we start to feel real value. One of the shortcuts for entrepreneurs that I try to remind people of is when we feel anxious or unworthy or whatever, we're often looking at like, we're comparing ourselves to other entrepreneurs or how much money have I made or whatever's going on. And one of the shortcuts to confidence is to focus back on what you really control and what you really are doing, right? Like, look, I don't know how this is going to be received. I don't know how many people are going to buy this product. I don't know how many people are going to download this podcast. But what I can control is making the podcast, showing up and doing the recording, putting it online, all those things. And I can tell you, as we've begun doing this new podcast that we're into now, as we're sharing it, it feels really good. Even if, you know, we're not really even tracking how many people are consuming it. It's on 1,000 different places. So it's hard to even know that. But every time I put something up, I'm like, you know what? That feels really good that we're trying to contribute, that we're trying to do something valuable. So this shortcut to confidence is to focus back on what you're doing and have the ability to move your mindset from where you worry, where you compare, where you think of others, and you bring it back to yourself and what you're actually doing. Does that make sense? Yeah,
definitely. And as a lot of things that we talk about, there's a conscious and unconscious level to this thing. So there's different layers to it, right? Because there's the obvious motivation behind consumption, and then there's what is that doing to your mindset, and then the obvious to creation, right? You can paint a picture, you can film a video, you can write a book, but like there's also another level of creation I think that we're looking at in a way, which is are you creating and giving into the world as someone that's truly matches what you value? You know what I mean? So there's just different levels to all of it. That's very,
I love that. Yeah, actually, one of the tips that we're going to get to in a minute is to know what you value. Right? That's something we'll probably talk about that a lot of times. The other bigger topic, which is probably for another conversation, is this idea of purpose. Right? Like, I don't think a lot of people know what purpose is. I do want to do a different show where we talk a lot more about purpose. But the thing that I want to mention here about it is our purpose matters, and our purpose is in the doing. Our purpose is in the mission that we're on, or the contribution that we're here to bring to others around us, to something that's a little bit bigger than ourselves. And where we feel fired up is not just the imagination of our purpose, although that helps. Just getting clear on your purpose is a big deal. All by itself. But what's even better than that is when you're taking some strides or action toward it, right? I guarantee you that you are not going to connect with a purpose of consumption. Your purpose here is not just to consume and to take and to receive, although it is important that we can receive. There's just side note, there's another problem of people who give too much of themselves and don't know how to receive, right? There's a balance here, of course. But what we're talking about here is if you're doing too much consumption, unconsciously or consciously, which ultimately in one sense could also lead to addiction, right? Like that's what addiction is. I'm addicted to my phone. I'm addicted to drugs. I'm addicted to feeling certain ways.
To food, to exercise,
totally.
to media.
Yep, to any of it, right? But the shortcut here to purpose is in the doing, right? So do you know what matters to you? Are you taking action on it? And are you creating or contributing in some way toward that? That lights us up. We end up feeling really, really different about ourselves and about the world when we do that. So yeah, do you have any other thoughts? I have a bunch of
can I speak into a little bit about that? Because it sounds like it's super useful. It's a great tip. Another thing that kind of comes up around it is another paradox around the consuming aspect, which is that when we get into the consuming mindset or have the identity of a consumer, I feel like we often think of like we're entitled then to more. The flip side of that coin, though, that is kind of a symptom of the same problem, is that we feel a separation, right?
Yeah.
We think, okay, I can never do what that big podcaster's doing. I can never write my book. So both things seem like we are owed to us, but also seem that they're beyond our reach, which kind of keeps us stuck in a different, that can be a hard challenge to overcome as well.
Yeah, let me ask you about that, because I think that's super interesting, but I want to make sure I'm really getting what you're saying. So, because to me, the consumption ends up having kind of an unconscious entitlement, right? We get trained that things are easy to get, things are easy to do. And then the other part is we start to feel separate or away from the ability of those that are doing the production, the creation, all that stuff. And we just sort of begin to feel like, oh, that couldn't possibly be me. And so are you saying those are kind of the same things? Because both those dynamics absolutely happen for sure. Do you feel that they're related in some way, or what do you mean?
Well, I guess I'm trying to see if they are. They both feel like of negative symptoms from consuming. And
totally.
It's interesting that it's a complete push-pull.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so one of the things, if you do nothing else after listening to this, but check in on how much am I kind of defaulting to this auto consumption, is such a wide word that we're using here, but this auto way of like listening, receiving, being entertained, eating delicious foods, whatever that is, almost we could kind of talk a little bit more about addiction, like almost in a way to feel better in the moment. The harder move maybe, but the more satisfying move is to, in some portion of your life, contribute, right? Decide what matters. How am I going to do this? Even to yourself, right? Like, how am I going to contribute to my body differently? That might be a workout plan. That might be eating a certain amount, making sure you eat a green smoothie every day, something where you're showing up. There's these little baby steps to this. And as you start to do that, as you gain mastery over your doing in some sense, you get a little bit closer to feeling like, oh, maybe I'll never have the most popular podcast in the world, but I can have a podcast that matters to some people, right? I can do something. I can write a book that actually gets published or is self-published or is something that's on my bookshelf that really is over there. And so we can start to feel like, oh, I really can be a contributor here, instead of there's nothing I have to say. There's nothing I have to offer. And that's absolutely the entire point of this talk, is to inspire people to take those baby steps to start creating more, decide what matters, et cetera. Does that make sense to you?
Definitely. Yeah. And I love adding the vocabulary of contributor and creator, because yes, both. Those are
so I think creation or creating, that's a blanket term that I'm using here. And that might imply that there's a piece of clay or a piece of art when you're done. It's more subtle than that. If you're contributing, that to me is an act of creation. It's not
absolutely
the opposite of consumption. So I want to blast through a couple of useful tips, or a few useful tips here. First step is notice how much consuming you're doing. Awareness is almost always the first step, especially in these things where our mindset or some blind spot is kind of working for us. So, try not to all the time go on autopilot. Be conscious about how you're spending money, how you're spending your time, how you're spending your resources, right? Monitor or track how you're doing each of those, so you can notice your own habits, right? And this is not every second of every day. It's really nice to just go, I'm taking the night off, right? I'm consuming all night. That's fantastic. Do that regularly and often, but just don't do it all the time. Okay. So I think the first step is just notice, is this a thing for you? Is this something where in your life you're not you find that you're procrastinating, you're not doing these things because it's easier just to kind of fall into watching YouTube all night or checking out Netflix or, eating bonbons, whatever.
Well, just to reference one of our programs that we ran, Stillness in Motion, we talked a lot about conscious consuming.
Yeah.
And so that's what it makes me think of. Just be aware of what you're doing. And
totally.
Yeah, you can work to change your habits if that's a problem for you, but even realizing what you're doing, not running on autopilot, just being conscious about how you're consuming whatever it is going to be huge for you.
Yeah, totally. Another useful tip here is to consider what the feeling of always wanting more does to you, right? So, man, this could have its own talk. Like it's so incredibly valuable. That sense of desire just being really, really loud. Like, I want more money. I want more friends. I want more time. I want another comedy show on. I want, a better fight
bigger
on
house, a better car,
yeah.
a newer phone, all the things.
Totally. So that sense of desire, which is maybe like the root of some of the Eastern traditions, like, Buddhism and Taoism and things like that, this real understanding of your own desire muscle and what that's doing to you and how that keeps you from being present, how it keeps you from feeling gratitude about what you already have, how it keeps you from feeling accomplished in who you already are, right? It immediately starts this thing. And so again, desire is not bad. It's what creates all this stuff, right? This desire for different, this creative muscle matters. Honestly, to create things, you're going to probably want to create them, right? So desire is going to be a part of that. But that feeling of always wanting more is something that we absolutely want to graduate out of, right? That's something we definitely want to shift in our mindset.
Well, and if we move away from the tangible things that we want, we can also speak into kind of the more emotional aspects. I want to be happier. I want more love. I want more friendship. Like we do that in all areas. We don't just do that in stuff or things that we can put our hand on. And that, like you said, I love that you said it takes away from our ability to have gratitude for the things that we do have or feel like the things that we do have aren't enough.
Yeah.
Like nothing's going to fulfill us beyond what we're doing up here. Like that to me is the key, is a real key.
Totally.
Like a real wake up.
So there's an interesting kind of side note there of, I almost want to just say it again in a different way. Like, if your desire muscle is too loud, that is going to feel like suffering for you. And if you can instead desire some, because that's going to be a part of what your brain is doing, it's natural, it's going to be happening for you. But if you can build the muscle of what am I grateful for? What is right around me? Who am I already? What have I accomplished? If you can make sure that that's conscious to you on some level, you're going to be much more satisfied in the world, right? Back to the consumption stuff. If you want to become more of a creator, there's probably a more interesting way to say that, but for now, that's what I got, right? If you want to be the author, if you want to be the podcaster, if you want to be somebody that's respected, all that, it's going to be really important that you get connected to what matters to you, right? You have to know what matters to you. What are you here to do? And I really want to inspire people to get fired up about this. Like, what do you want to say? You've got a unique perspective that nobody's ever had before you. Nobody will ever have after you. It is private to you. Nobody has seen outside, from inside you to outside except you. And so I always love to say that we're all waiting to hear from you. Like, what is your understanding of joy and pain and what you've learned and what you've seen is yours alone. And if you live your life and die without sharing any of that, that to me is a really sad story, right? And so decide what matters. What do you want to talk about? Are you upset about, the factory farming or, what matters to you in some way? Do you really love fashion or something? Whatever it is for you, decide what you're here to do and say and know that, right? So that you know your own values, you know what matters to you.
I love that. The world is waiting. The world is waiting to hear from you.
Yeah.
And what if you woke up every day and that's what you said? Like, how would that change your day? How would that change how you act? That shortcut to confidence we talked about, or you talked about right in the beginning, that I instantly, when I say that to myself, I feel way more confident.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
It's great.
It's a big deal. I have a side note for entrepreneurs, right? There's a lot of entrepreneurs that are really, they want to be the creators, right? Entrepreneurs really want to put value out into the world. Now, some of them are selfish and they just want to make money or whatever, but I think that the grand majority of them are trying to be a bit artistic. They're trying to solve a problem. They're trying to do all these things. Entrepreneurs, or what I might call wantrepreneurs, are people who are maybe in a job and they're dying to go out and get, their business started, but they don't feel like they're quote unquote there yet, right? They haven't learned enough. They haven't done anything. So for entrepreneurs, just know that learning is another form of consumption, and it's a safety move for many of us. I have a very close friend who I think could be taking bigger steps in his business, but he's constantly like, learning about marketing or learning about his craft or learning about whatever. And instead, slow down the learning and begin the doing, because you will learn as you do. And if you really want to be an entrepreneur, go make a difference. Go hang that shingle up, say you do what you do, start getting into it and go do it. It's the only way that you're actually going to be an entrepreneur, right? As we do identity shifting stuff, a lot of people come to me going, I really want to become an entrepreneur. And it's like, that has to begin at some point, right? Now, all that said, yes, there are some things you need to learn, et cetera. There may be good things to do, but I often see people remain entrepreneurs for years and years and years, and they never actually step into the doing of it. Okay.
Doing is key. Doing is key.
Yeah.
Right?
And so maybe the last practical tip here that I know I want to share is do your doing first, right? Because consumption has a gravity to it, right? So as soon as you kind of start Netflix, as an example, or as soon as you start scrolling, if you woke up and just began on social media, it really has this gravity to be hard to get back to the creating part, right? If you want to go work out, it's easier to just get up and go work out and kind of get it out of the way, because by the end of the day, your willpower is constantly devolving, right? It's this thing that you kind of wake up with the most willpower you're going to have for the day. And if you don't apply that wisely, all of the little annoying pulls of the day will be depleting your willpower, right? That person who annoys you, it takes will to not yell at them, right? That person driving by honking at you, it takes will not to flip them off or whatever you might want to do. And so the world and the day will be depleting your willpower. If you leave your creation for the end of the day, for many of us, some people are just more creative at night. This may not, be 100% true for everybody, but I think it's a good rule to think what's something that I want to do today and try to put it first. So, if you are attacking your day, what are the big important things that are really going to move the needle? Try to get them done in the morning. That way, if you get to lunch and you've already done them, it's a killer day already. And then you can go do the meetings and the things that kind of are going to pull at your attention and that you need to be there for. But the things that need deep focus, that are harder, that are really creative tasks, do it when you're fresh, do it in the morning, just as a general tip. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it changes your mindset. So all the kind of topics I think that we'll address over the lifetime of the podcast, there's a quick switch that you can flip, right? It is not like a magic pill or a cure-all, but there is a quick switch that you can flip that will change it completely. So the idea of, the world is waiting to hear from me, the idea of I can create versus I don't have enough, I need more. It's a totally different mindset, and it will change how your day is, how your goals are set, and how ultimately you feel about yourself.
Yeah, totally. So some of those useful tips, right? Notice how much consumption you're doing. Consider what the feeling of always wanting more does to you. How does that deplete you in all these ways? And how can you move your attention? Moving attention is one of the skills that we teach in some of our work. Gain mastery over where your attention is. Gain mastery over noticing if you're always wanting more, if you're always consuming, if that's happening, there's a way to move your attention away from that into what is more valuable to you. So if you don't know what that is, that's going to be a problem. So the other useful tip is decide what matters. Really know what matters to you. And then the other useful tip that we just mentioned is, do your doing first, right? Get up and be creative. Get into that, because the consumption has a habit gravity behind it. So as we wind up this idea, unless you've got more to share, I just want to ask, what if instead of listening, you started being a leader doing the talking, right? If instead of just listening to the world and kind of receiving, what if you were taking your unique perspective and you were contributing? What if you started sharing what you're here to share? What if you started sharing and talking? What if you were the author? What if you were the authentic person sharing on social media things that are valuable to you, creative, artistic, helpful? And what if people were following and consuming what you have to say, right? So this is a call to become more of a leader in your own life, in your family, in your local society, and in the world in general. That's what I want for you guys. That's what I think is super valuable. Does that make sense to you, Sarah?
Definitely. And just a tip to remember through all of it is the people that you see doing that are not different than you.
Yeah.
They may have taken different action. But as Rob was saying, everyone has their own subjective experiences, and there's value in sharing that, obviously appropriately, but there's value in sharing that. So don't be afraid of it, and be confident.
Awesome. I love it. I think that's good enough for now. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate you, and we'll talk to you really soon. Bye-bye.